Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Scott Samuelson and I'm a professor of philosophy at Kirkwood Community College on the Iowa City campus. When we think of teachers in higher education, we often imagine tenured faculty in their messy, book-filled offices. While such creatures still exist, the fact is that over 50% of faculty hold only part-time, often semester-to-semester appointments. The national median income for these adjunct professors is $2,700 per course, with scant benefits, if any at all. A new study by the University of Berkeley reports that 25% of part-time professors receive some kind of public assistance. Maybe we should reimagine teachers in higher education as standing in line for food stamps. Are adjunct professors being exploited? In what ways is our heavy reliance on part-time professors good or bad for students? To what extent do our Iowa institutions of higher education rely on part-time teachers? Should part-time professors get paid more than they do? But can we pay them more when the cost of higher education is already at an all-time high? We have a great panel on today to discuss these questions about adjunct professors and part-time professors in higher education. To my left is Marie Baehr, a Vice President for Academic Affairs at Coe College. Marie, thank you for being on. Thank you. John Solow, a Professor of Economics at the University of Iowa. John, thank you for being on again.
Nice to be here.
And at the end, Matt Thomas, an adjunct professor at Kirkwood Community College. Thanks for being on, Matt.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay, well, Marie, maybe we can start with you and we can sort out some of this terminology here about adjunct professors, part-time professors. Can you help orient us a little bit about what we're talking about here?
I think one of the problems is there is no standard. So, for example, at Coe, we have part-time faculty, which most people I think would call adjunct faculty, and then we have adjunct faculty who are not paid probably as well as they should be paid, but they're paid a pretty good wage with full benefits. And then you have teaching assistants, which aren't either one, but they still do the teaching. So I think that it just becomes problematic. So I think this is mainly about part-time.
Right.
Right.
That seems fair enough. Yeah. But let me just ask you then the question, so are part-time and or adjunct professors being exploited? I mean, I think we all understand that it's nice to have some part-time work. It's nice to have people who can have some adjunct work to kind of get them a leg up. But are we relying too much on that kind of work for us in higher education?
I think in higher education, yes. I think it depends on the institution a lot. So I think some of the small privates don't rely on it as much because you can't. I came from an institution outside of Chicago where almost 40% of the classes were taught by part-time people because there were a lot of people looking for jobs and they could kind of exploit that. But I think it depends on the location and it depends on how you're treating the faculty.
Right. Okay, well, John, let's bring you into the conversation. Sure. Are part-time professors being exploited in our system right now?
So I think it depends a lot on how you define exploited. And I am an economist, and so while I'm not always the free market guy, I'm going to stand up for the market a little bit here. I think that so long as people understand what the likelihood of getting a job is, and enter into it with, as rational people, enter into it understanding the likelihood. I don't find that exploitive. People make decisions. I think people might be, you might be crazy to go and get a PhD in certain fields, understanding what the odds of getting a job in that field are. And I don't. People aren't forced to do this. People choose to pursue PhDs and then pursue teaching jobs. By the way, I guess the other point I would like to make is that they're not all badly paid. We actually I can't speak for the entire University of Iowa. I can speak for my own department where I'm the department head. But we actually, the people who are part-time and visitors and non-tenure track people and adjuncts, they are actually paid quite well. We don't pay $2,000 a course, I'll tell you that.
Right, right. Well, I want to come back to some of the things you brought up, but let's bring Matt in on the conversation too. So, I mean, first of all, are you crazy for having gone into this business and now as an adjunct? But second of all, do you feel like we're relying too much in higher education overall on part-time faculty?
Well, I want to go back to like one of your first questions, which is a sort of definitional question. And I think the key thing is sort of between tenured faculty or tenured track faculty and then non-tenured track faculty,
Right.
which encompasses part-time, adjunct, graduate teaching assistants. And so that, I think, is one of the sort of the key distinctions. And so the fastest growing kind of job openings are non-tenured or non-tenured track positions. And so I think that's the thing that like sort of students and parents would be the most sort of interested in hearing about when they think they're sending their kids off to school. And then they do have this perception of professors, like this idea of like, oh, they all have offices and they all have like these stacks of books and they're all sort of like working on their projects and they're all kind of like, you know, this dead poet society kind of teacher that can also do research and this sort of very idealistic thing. And no, it's people who don't have offices, who are, you know, their office is their car or a coffee shop. And so I think that's sort of like the interesting thing, rather than parse all these other things. And are people crazy to get into it? Well, sort of yes and no. But one of the things is, you know, departments and universities don't necessarily do a great job of telling graduate students and people who go into wanting to get teaching positions what the chances are. And it's really hard to find statistics about, you know, breakdown between tenure track and adjunct work. Universities are not like putting it on the website, come here and do this, and departments aren't saying here's what we pay adjuncts. And so yeah, so you know, the business school or an economics school, they might pay, you know, $7,000 a class, $10,000 a class at some places, but other places maybe not so much.
Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead,
I think that's a fair point, that you know, people should not be baiting and switching graduate students. You should explain to graduate students in your field what the
What the
market
odds are.
prospects are. We post our placements on our website, so you get a pretty good. You could probably figure out how well our people are doing. Now, economics is an area where there is actually quite a good market. There are lots of jobs.
Right. So you have that luxury.
Yeah,
at
we're
some
fortunate.
point,
Well,
a couple things. Well, first, let's start with just statistics. So does anyone have some sense of, as you said, Matt, it's a little difficult to get this, but like how much do these institutions in Iowa, I mean, you say, as you point out, Marie, it's different from private and public and all that, but how much are we relying on part-time adjunct type professors overall, or non-tenured?
Yeah, I think you can get the statistics. It takes a little bit of work, but IPEDS, which stands for, I forget what it stands for, but if you Google IPEDS, it's the place that every school is required to say how many students they have, how many part-time students, how many full-time students, how many full-time faculty, how many part-time faculty. So you can go in there and you can see what the ratio of the full-time faculty to the part-time faculty is. It doesn't get to your point of how many are tenured or not tenured, although you can drill down and get that
There are those statistics too, but again, it's hard to find. It's not exactly like the universities are proud of these numbers, and when asked, they're like, yeah, it's a problem.
You have to look for them.
Right,
Yes, I agree.
you have
I
to look
agree
for
that
them.
you have to look for them.
And just at the University of Iowa, you know, we know that, you know, there's a lot of tenured faculty and tenure track faculty, but the number of part-time and graduate teaching assistants outnumbers that. So if you take all that into consideration, when students are coming to the University of Iowa, you know, it's, I don't know, 50-50, or maybe it's even closer to, you know, they're going to be taught for their first 2 years by adjuncts, by graduates.
Well, what I see overall, the
Yeah.
national numbers I look at overall, says that over 50% of faculty in the nation are part-time faculty. I mean, which
that may
seems
be
a little-
true. I mean, the University of Iowa is not the average. Don't mean to blow our horn too much, but we are not the average university. We are a Research One university. We are in the fairly elite tier, not as elite as some, but you have to remember that our mission is not purely teaching undergraduate courses, but it's also to do research and to do service to the state and to the world. I think graduate students, I want to come back to the graduate student question, it's a little bit different. I mean, graduate students are there for a fairly short period of time. They don't generally have, at least in my department, have classes of their own, but they're in training. They're not, this is, anyone who comes to graduate school thinking teaching sections ought to earn me a wage that will support me and my family for the next 10 years really doesn't understand what graduate school is about.
Right. Well, that seems true, but it also seems like we want, like I said, it seems like we want to have some tiers, that we would like to have some jobs for graduate students that give them, you know, a way of learning learning the ropes of their of teaching and their discipline. But then it also seems like we don't want, I mean, we don't want to be in a situation where universities want to hide their numbers about how many part-time faculty that they actually have, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fair enough.
Well, and we know that though time to degree is going up, so you know, in a lot of disciplines, it's, you know, now over a decade is normal. So it is a short time for sometimes for people, and then we know that the best thing to sort of increase time to degree is giving people funding. And so, you know, there is a graduate student union at the University of Iowa that has sort of over the last 10 years or so fought to get to better benefits and better pay, and so it's made people want to come to the University of Iowa for that rather than go to another school.
Well, one question I have too is, I mean, we're talking about, let's say, from the perspective of a parent or a student. I mean, do you really care if the person is a part-time person or not? I mean, I imagine that, I know at Kirkwood we have lots of great adjunct professors, lots of great part-time professors, and I'm sure at most institutions that's true. What are the downsides from the perspective of the parents or the students coming into this situation, or the upsides for that matter?
I think they're both upsides and downsides. I think for a school as small as Co, it's very nice to have part-time people who come in who are practitioners in their field, who can come in and kind of have a different viewpoint, as long as there are a few courses taught like that. But for at least the small private colleges, I think, it ends up that what you want is kind of an anchor to the school, so that you know that if you leave 5 years later, you can get a letter of recommendation, and you know that the faculty member who you bonded with is going to still be there. That becomes problematic if you have part-time faculty who you don't support, and end up moving on.
Right.
So. Or even if they don't leave, I mean, this is a problem that we run into from time to time, is that you know, if you're a good undergraduate and you want to go to graduate school, a letter of recommendation from a part-time person or a lecturer doesn't carry the same kind of weight at a good school as a letter from a researcher that's known to the people who are going to be reading the letter. So that's the other point I want to make is, again, coming from the research school perspective, you know, what we do is very different than high school. We're not just telling students a bunch of facts to memorize. We're trying to teach them how to think and how to think critically. And I think we want to have people who are modeling that, and the way they model that is by doing research. And so full-time faculty are supposed to be doing research as well. And that's something the students can come in, they can get involved in research, they can ask questions. Faculty can talk to students about their own work as opposed to something that somebody who wrote a textbook did. And we want students, I certainly want my students to see that, and they don't see that as much from somebody who is juggling 3 different jobs and just trying to make a living. So we really want to have research scholars teaching our undergraduate courses. The advantage, of course, is that it is inexpensive, and budgets are tight and getting tighter in places. And it becomes, you know, my department could really use some extra faculty, and we've got the support of our dean, and we're working hard at it. But in the meantime, we've got to find people who will teach those courses. We've got to deliver the courses.
Well, Matt, one thing that I worry about sometimes, and maybe you can speak to this, or from either your experience or people that you know, is that, you know, like I said, I have great faith in our adjunct faculty usually overall, but I worry that they feel a certain kind of pressure if they are relying on stringing together a bunch of jobs and they're going on a semester to semester basis. They're worried about not getting rehired next semester, And I worry if that means that they're going to be a little more likely to cut some corners, make students a little happier, maybe not hold them to quite the same sorts of standards. Now, obviously, people are going to say that outright, but I just worry that when you don't have that feeling of comfort as a professor,
this is a huge debate, and this is a lot of discussions, and that when your you're sort of being evaluated on your job performance semester to semester, a student evaluation, a student complaint, you rub someone in the department the wrong way, there goes your sort of adjunct position. So the security doesn't necessarily make for a good context for great teaching or great research. And so you can sort of get stuck in that adjunct track, and then you don't have any time to research because you're teaching 3 classes at 3 different schools for 9 classes total just to make, $20,000 a year or something, and then you're not able to then compete with other people for full-time jobs. So it's sort of like a vicious cycle. But let's be clear, people get into adjuncting because they like to teach and because that's like their teaching experience and because they love to do it. And some of the best faculty members that I had as an undergraduate were I only found out later, right? Undergraduates don't have a sense of this necessarily. We're part-time people, or we're adjuncts, and so but those are sometimes some of the most dedicated teachers. So how can we encourage those people? Some people talk about maybe creating a kind of teaching track or a kind of teaching track for tenure at R1 universities. And so let the research people go off and do their esoteric research and let the people who really love to teach, teach. And some people can maybe do both. And so how to figure out that balance?
Well, yeah, right. I think that is the key, is finding the balance. And that's, I guess, what I keep coming back to, is worrying that perhaps the balance, at least in some places, is getting a little off.
Well, one of the groups that isn't represented here is the online institutions,
right.
and I think if you can look at almost any of them, a lot of the for-profits, they have very few full-time.
Right.
I mean, they probably rely on 80%
Right.
part-time, and you can go on. I looked at this because it was interesting. You can go on and you can basically tap a button and say, here's my CV, here are my credentials, and within 2 days they'll tell you whether or not you're teaching a course in the fall.
Right.
That's amazing to me. I would kind of like to talk to the person, but so I think that the 50% number that you have, part of that is ballooned up, not because of these institutions, which I think are continuing to work the way they probably worked 5 or 10 years ago, but the online presence.
Well, right, but okay, but this is my fear, and maybe I have to come back to the economists for this, but I mean, this is my fear, is that that's the future for everyone, or at least we're moving in that way, that in other words, institutions of higher education will start thinking things like, look, the way we can become more profitable, or the way we can cut some corners, is by increasingly relying on part-time work. Maybe it won't be as extreme as 80% of our faculty, or a 90%, or something that a for-profit institution might rely on. But that nonetheless, that's what we got to do. That's our competition. And so increasingly, maybe people will have full knowledge of what they're getting into, but the pressures of the market itself will make higher education into something that's less valuable.
I'm not so convinced, and fortunately I'm an old guy, and so it's not going to happen in my lifetime. But I have a son who's also going into the profession, and I don't think it's going to happen in his lifetime either. Look, if it were so easy for people to simply read a book or watch a video and teach themselves, then we would have real problems. But most of the experience that we have with massive online courses and the like doesn't suggest that's going to be the future.
Well, no, I agree with you on that point, and that's of course a whole other show in itself.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, I know a place like Kirkwood where I work, we feel like, hey, we are in sort of competition with some of those schools, and we've tried to stand up for small class sizes, for having a decent number of full-time faculty there and who have ownership over the curriculum. But if these are our competitors, and if they continue to be a major player, then it puts pressures on all of us to.
They're failing. They're having all sorts of problems with students who they push the loans and then don't deliver, and then the students end up in debt. They're getting sued. The people who start the courses overwhelmingly don't complete them. So again, I don't
Right, but
think I
the
would
University
worry
of
about
Phoenix seems to be doing
I'm not so
fairly
sure.
well,
They
right?
may be the one.
Well,
But
some of them are doing quite well. Some of them are failing, and some of them are doing quite well. But they've been around for a long time, and it hasn't really shut down. I mean, people are making the choices, and they're still making the choices as small liberal arts colleges. They're still making the choices at the large research ones. They're still making the choices at the community colleges. So I think it's a competition, and I think you have to pay attention to the competition, but I don't think they're going to win whole hog.
Well, I guess I would
Yeah.
like to see as part of the competition this kind of, boasting we have more full-time faculty.
And that
think
would
we
be great.
rely
And I
on that,
think,
right.
and I don't think online is the future. Like, I agree with you, John. And I think, that especially for people of a certain kind of demographic and prestige, they're going to be going for face-to-face education, real presence education. I think, the grandchildren of Mitt Romney are not going to be going to the University of Phoenix. Sasha and Malia Obama are not going to be going to a MOOC for their education. They're going to be going and having face-to-face interaction with real professors. So, but the question is then, how many of those professors are going to be in a stable position, and how many are going to be kind of hollowed out? I think the trend, both in Iowa and nationwide, is towards an increasing reliance on non-tenured faculty and non-tenured professors. So the question is sort of like, what does that mean? Who your original question was, are we exploiting adjuncts? I think, maybe you could make that case, but I think maybe also students and parents who are taking up massive loans to pay for these educations are also kind of getting exploited if they then can't get a letter of recommendation that's going to get them to graduate school or going to get them to a career right away out of college. That's sort of one of my more long-term worries.
by the way, again, we started at the beginning with this terminology bit, and I do think this is worth sorting out, right? So an adjunct at Iowa, typically an adjunct is somebody who has another job. So it's the dentist who 4 days a week runs a dental practice, a private dental practice, and does quite well, but 1 day a week or maybe 1 day a month comes in and does a little classroom work and demonstrates techniques. And that person is not poor, and that person is not lacking for job security. In the business school, this is very common, right? We get the accountant who wants to come in once a week and do some practical accounting teaching, and those people are not poor and they don't lack job security. Our lecturers are now on, these are non-tenure track people, but they're on 3-year contracts. They don't lack job security completely. And in fact, given how valuable they are, they probably are more secure than some of the untenured but tenure track people. And we're actually working on longer term contracts than that. We're not quite there yet. So it's really the part-time people. It's the itinerant visitor who moves from school to school to school.
Right.
I think that's
We don't have a lot of, at least to my knowledge, we don't have a lot of them. We certainly don't in the College of Business, I'll tell you that.
I think that's one kind of adjunct, but I think increasingly that's a sort of, there's other kinds of adjuncts. And so those students are still having to take general education courses. They still need to learn how to write because everybody in business wants people to learn how to write and communicate. And the people teaching writing and communication classes are going to be adjuncts or graduate teaching assistants. So in certain instances, it is, and if we could go to a model where the businessman in the community is teaching a class on the side, and that was the only kind of adjunct we had, that would be, I don't think we would see the level of kind of national debate or anxiety about this that we do now.
No, I agree. But what I worry is that the national debate and anxiety is often about things that aren't really as bad as people realize, because they hear that so-and-so is an adjunct or a visitor and they go, well, that must be terrible, but it's not always terrible.
Well, what about, what does need to be changed, if anything? What kinds of changes could be made that would be productive changes overall? One would just be to pay part-time people a little bit more. But the worry there is that everyone feels like college is already way too expensive, and where's that money going to come from? You mentioned this idea of having 3-year contracts or something that gives a little more stability. That seems like maybe a possibility.
There is a national campaign pushing for $15,000 per class.
Right.
That was something that was happening a couple months ago with
Right.
national
Compared to
adjunct.
2,700.
Yeah.
Our full-time would become adjunct.
And it was a little bit hyperbolic, but it was to make a statement about sort of living wages and how much work goes into teaching. Like I think that people are looking for just sort of basic things: job security, health insurance, maybe like a little bit more money would be great. If you look at where the money in universities, especially R1 universities, is going, it's going to a sort of sprawling administrative class. It's going to university presidents. It's going to coaches. When you think about like institutional priorities, is it to pay, University of Iowa is now looking for a new president. That president's probably going to be getting more money than our current president. And our current president already gets, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So maybe it's time to have university presidents say, I'm going to take less, and we're going to hire, we're going to pay our adjuncts a little bit more.
Right. Marie, what you had an idea about what are things that we could productively do here?
I think there just has to be an honesty. I think kind of going back to your point about the, they're all different. You might call everybody an adjunct, but they're all different reasons that people take those jobs. And if they're taking it to basically augment what they already enjoy doing, that's different than if they're trying to make a living. And I think it's very difficult to make a living being an adjunct in different places. So I think there has to be an honesty. Lots of schools will have formulas. So, and this was in the late 1980s and 1990s. You would say, okay, so full-time faculty, they teach 6 courses, but they have 10 units. And some of them are research units, and some of them are service units. And so we should pay a part-time faculty 1/10 of what we'd pay a full-time faculty for a course. And that was actually pretty close in the 80s and the 90s, but the adjunct pay hasn't gone up a lot, and the full-time pay has gone up more. And so that kind of got skewed. So maybe having some sort of honesty about what percent is a course in a full-time teaching load could at least help and justify what the pay is. And I think if somebody is teaching 4 courses when other people are teaching 6 courses, they should have benefits.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. John, should things change? We only have about a minute here, but
look, what I really think ought to change is that not just Iowa, but the country as a whole should devote more attention to higher education. And by more attention, I mean more resources. Look, China claims to be building 20 MITs in the next 20 or 40 years or something like that. Meanwhile, we're cutting budgets. That is not a way for us to do well as a country. And I think that, like the bumper sticker says, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. That's the bottom line.
Okay, well, I'm afraid that's going to happen. Well, actually, I'm happy that has to be our last word. That seems like
I think we can all agree.
I'm afraid that our conversation has to end, which we could continue on. But I'd like to thank you all for a very stimulating conversation, and it's one that I hope people will continue to carry on in their homes and communities. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on Ethical Perspectives on the News.